We are in lesson 6 of our study of the genealogy of Jesus. And we are hanging out, if you're going through the genealogies, hanging out in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 3. And what's funny about a lot of these people, and we talked about this last week when we talked about Isaac. Isaac seems to be a passive character. And anytime you read about Isaac, the story's not about Isaac. It's about Abraham's faith, or it's about Jacob and Esau and his kids. Isaac just represents faithfulness. He represents a promise. But you hardly see many words that ever come from Isaac. And as we go through this lesson, you're going to see much of the same about Judah. You don't really read a lot about Judah, but also another person here. See there in chapter 1 and verse 3 of Matthew, Judah begot Perez and Zerah, that is the twins, by Tamar, okay? Now, Tamar is the first of the 4 ladies that we're going to run across in the genealogy of Jesus. And many times we will go through and talk about the 4 ladies, and as you go through, you got Tamar, and you got Ruth, and you've got Mary, and you've got Bathsheba, who is the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And we'll go through and talk about and you also have Rahab. So you got 5 ladies. As you run through there, you'll see these ladies, and a lot of times we talk about, how they were in this situation or that situation, weakened situation. That's the reason they're brought out. Tamar, you're going to read about being a little bit different. Now, we don't know, well, you know, but your typical Christian doesn't know the background story of Tamar because it's rated PG-13, maybe you would say, and it's just one of those stories we don't talk about very often. We're going to talk about it briefly in Bible class today, but it's not brought out very often. But you're going to see her faithfulness and how her faithfulness changes Judah and makes Judah be what he needs to be to fulfill his role in society. But first, before we get to Judah and before we get to Tamar, we got to hang out with Jacob. So here we go, Jacob and Esau. All right, Jacob, I have mentioned several times before, it's just an awesome story. He's the struggler with God. You remember when he's born, his wife, she hasn't been able to have children. Isaac prays, she's pregnant. She's pregnant with twins. So here we go. And if you remember, what's interesting is Abraham could not have children, and God had to intervene to bring forth Isaac. Isaac and Rebekah could not have children, so the Lord had to intervene so they could have children. Jacob, also, we're going to see quite a bit with the children. God intervenes many times and works through. And so you see where God is he's pushing this family narrative because he's bringing forth Jesus, as we see in Galatians 4:4, in the fullness of time. All right. So now Isaac's wife, Rebekah, she's pregnant. But she notices something's weird. It's always fun when your wife's pregnant. Don't let me finish there, okay? One of the things to notice, one of the things I like, is every once in a while, late into pregnancy, you can see the baby kick in her belly or move. And sometimes you can even see a footprint or a handprint, and that is just so cool to see. And it is more so for the husband and not for the wife because it's not your body, right? Well, Rebekah notices there's some jostling, but it is beyond her typical baby has hiccups and all this sort of thing. So, she prays to God about it because she's worried, and God responds, what you feel is legit. Now, that's my translation. But what you feel is legitimate. You have 2 nations warring in your body, and they're going to fight each other all their lives, and they're both going to, one will, overpower the other, but the other one will throw off the yoke. And so your boys are going to fight forever. You've got 2 nations. They are not going to get along. And so they go through that the whole time. Jacob is born. Esau is born first. But as he is being born, Jacob's hand is holding the heel of Esau and trying to pull Esau back in the womb so he can be born first. Can you imagine? These 2 boys are already fighting even in the process of birth. Boy, this is going to be rough, isn't it? And they fight, and they fight, and they fight. And so Esau is named Esau because he is red and hairy. And Esau is red clay is what that word means. Okay? Jacob is called Jacob, which means struggler or deceiver. The Joker is what we would say, since we've seen Batman. He is someone who is always trying to fool somebody, always trying to tear somebody up. He is always smarter than everybody else in the room and taking advantage of everybody. And so now Jacob grows, and as he grows, he sees Esau going out hunting. Esau hunts like I fish. He comes back starving to death because he hadn't caught a thing. And so as he comes back, he's about to die. At least he thinks he's about to die, says that, and it's probably true. And Jacob, waiting for this very moment, says, hey, I've got your favorite stew. And Esau says, great, it's going to make it where I don't die. And he says, but I'm only going to give it to you if you sell your birthright. Esau says, hey, I'm about to die. It doesn't matter. If I die, I don't get the birthright anyway. And so he sells his birthright for some porridge, for some stew, as we read of in the book of Hebrews. Then it's time to give the blessing. Jacob gets his mother to, get some goat fur to put on him. Isaac is blind. And so Jacob is able to fool him and get the promise, the blessing which is there. Then Jacob's got to leave. He goes to Laban's house. And Laban gets the best of him at first. Laban is the same kind of person Jacob is. Jacob finds the woman he loves, which is Rachel. She is beautiful. And he says, I've got to have this woman. Laban says, awesome. You work 7 years. I'll give it to her. Give her to you. So he says, all right, 7 years. It's only but a day. Oh, guys in love, right? So he goes through it. The marriage happens. She's in a veil, into burqa thing, sort of thing. And so they get married to go to the tent. He wakes up the next morning, and she looks different because she is not Rebecca. She's not Rachel. She's Leah. Leah, the way the Hebrew says, it makes your eyes sore when you look at her. Okay? That's how she's described, as sore eyes. So not exactly the most flattering thing you could say about a person. And Jacob says, I don't want her. I want her sister. And Laban says, well, that's just the way we've always done it. It's not the way they've always done it, but that's what he says. So he works another 7 years. He gets to marry both women. He works another 7 years. And to finish it up, you've read this in Bible class where they go back and forth. And Jacob says, I'll take the spotted goats. You take the plain goats. And somehow the way he feeds them, all they turn out spotted. And then they go back and forth. And Jacob just knows how to breed the goats, and he fools Laban and takes most of his flocks, and he runs away. In other words, Jacob, his whole life is taking advantage of everybody. Everybody gets taken advantage of because he is smarter than them, he is stronger than them, he's more cunning than them. You just can't catch up to him. And then we go to the transition. The transition is Genesis 34 and Genesis 35, okay? Genesis 34, what you run across is here's Jacob. He has fooled everybody, but he's running out of options, running out of cards to play the game. And as the game's going down, he realizes there's no ace in the hole, if you want to use that analogy. And Esau has been pursuing him. Esau has 400 men in an army. Jacob does not. And Jacob realizes, I am in deep trouble. And so Jacob develops rings around him to defend himself, and so he sends the rings across. Esau's over there. We have to meet Esau because our back's against the wall. So we're going to send our flocks and our shepherds across the river and see what Esau does. So he sends them across, and then we're going to send our servants across the river to see what he does. And then we're going to send our children and our wives across the river to see what he does. And now Jacob's all by himself. And he doesn't know if the next day he's going to be slaughtered, if everybody he loves is gone. He doesn't know. He just is there. And so that night, as he's sleeping, a man comes. Now, Hosea tells us that it is an angel. A lot of people think it's God or it's a representation of God. But this angel comes, and this man comes. He comes in appearance as a man. And they begin to fight, and they begin to wrestle. And Jacob finally reaches the point where he cannot win. This guy that he's wrestling is stronger, more talented. Jacob fights and fights. They go all night, And Jacob's not winning. But Jacob is tenacious and will not let go. So he's holding on, even though he's getting whipped, or whooped, as we say in the South. He holds on and will not let go. The man keeps saying, "I've beat you, let me go." And he's like, "I will not let go." And so the angel slaps him in the hip and either does some sort of ligament damage or whatever. Jacob's going to limp the rest of his life. And Jacob still will not let go. And he says, "Give me a blessing." And so the angel changes his name from Jacob to Israel. Now, Jacob means a struggler and a deceiver. Israel means someone who struggled with God. Okay, you got that L at the end, Israel. Okay, someone who struggles with God. And from that point, now, of course, the next chapter, Jacob's boys have grown up. And one of his daughters there is named Dinah. She's raped. And the boys have learned just the same as their father has. And so the man who raped Dinah, who is a Canaanite, comes over and says, "Oh, I'll fix the situation. Sorry my son raped your wife. Let's just have them get married. That way I can have your possessions too." Now, in our culture, that is to force somebody who's raped to have to marry their rapist. Yuck, right? On the other hand, not only did they defile your daughter, now they're trying to take possession and trying to be counted as one of your children. It's just distasteful. Well, Jacob doesn't do anything about it, but the boys, the second and third oldest, Levi and Simeon, tell them, "Oh, yes, that's a great idea, Shechem. Yes, that's a great idea. But we've got a tradition, and our tradition is before we can intermarry with someone, what has to happen is all the men of your city need to be circumcised." Whoa, okay. And so they say, "All right," this is chapter 35 of Genesis, if you're following along. And so after they're circumcised, which of course you're not able to move after that happens, you're going to be in a pretty sore state. After that happens, they come into the city and they slaughter everybody because they can't fight back, and they just kill everybody, which is revenge, and it's exactly what they deserved. But Jacob tells the boys, "We're in trouble because we've just done that to a whole city. The entire region around us, they're going to join together and fight us, and we're not going to be able to overcome." Well, God takes care of them. God makes sure nothing happens to them. But what I want you to see there is Jacob has raised his boys to be just like him. Now, talk about a messed up family. If you've got your little notes here, follow this yellow box here, and you can see some dysfunction, all right? If you feel bad at home, just read these guys. You're going to feel a lot better. Okay, what happens is Leah is the not-so-pretty one. She is not loved. Imagine if your sister, your whole life you're growing up, your sister is pretty, your sister is better, your sister is greater, everybody cares about your sister and they don't care about you. Imagine what you feel like growing up. Now imagine if the time has come for you to get married and your dad just married both you and your sister, the same man, and the man outright says, "I don't want this one. I want my money back. This is wrong that you made me marry her." Imagine how you feel. So now the marriage has begun, and Rachel is not able to have children. Leah is. But what I want you to notice is not just the names, but more so the meaning behind each name, okay? Reuben is the firstborn. What's Reuben mean? God has seen my misery. Wow, okay? What's Leah saying? God has seen that nobody loves me, but I just had the firstborn. So maybe now my husband will love me, okay? Child number 2, Simeon. God has heard that I'm not loved. God is taking care of me, right? Number 3, I've had 3 boys. Maybe now my husband will love me. All right, you see a theme? All right, there's a theme going here. Judah, I will now praise God. I've got 4 boys. Nobody else is having children. I am, doing this promise of God, this covenant, which Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have always talked about. This is it. My husband will love me now. Rachel is furious because she cannot have children. So she gets her handmaid, her slave named Bilhah, and she says, I've got to have children. you go sleep with my husband so that now Leah does not have prominence over me. Imagine how messed up that is. Does that sound like a messed up home? Oh boy, it does. All right. So then Dan, and so now Rachel says, well, God has vindicated me. Naphtali, I am fighting with my sister and I'm catching up. Okay? So Leah goes nuts and she gets her slave girl and she gives her to the husband. It's a messed up family. Gad, what good fortune I have. This is boy number 5. You take that. Asher, I'm happy now. This is number, 6? Okay. Or number 5, I guess it is. Leah. And then we go back. Once again, Leah keeps having kids. Issachar, I've been rewarded by God. Zebulun, I have 6 natural children for my husband, so surely God's going to love me. Then we have Dinah, the daughter. And then finally, Rachel has a baby, and that baby is named Joseph. All right? So here's the dysfunction. We've got these 11 kids. Benjamin will come later, and he doesn't fit into this necessarily. But now Joseph is born of the favorite wife. So what does Jacob do? Jacob goes and he gets a coat of many colors and he gives it to the child. And you remember in Bible class, maybe you got to make your little coat of many colors. So, maybe if you're teaching that class, you talk about, this is so pretty. What's happening here? Joseph is telling the boys, hey, this boy is younger than all of you, but even though he's younger, he's prominent because he comes from the woman I love. You don't matter anywhere close to what he matters, okay? Now imagine number 2, the boys are going out and working every day. Who gets to be their supervisor? Who does the father say, you stay with me and you just go and check on the boys every once in a while? Who's the supervisor? Joseph, all right? Now imagine if you work at a job for 15 years and this new guy is hired, guy that has no experience, the guy is an absolute jerk, and your boss says, hey, he's going to be the boss. He is going to be the manager over you. How are you going to feel about that? He doesn't know how this works. He is a jerk. I don't want to listen to him. Jacob is making the point. This boy is the one that matters. This boy is the one that we care about. Now Joseph begins having dreams. God is prophesying through him. And you have all the sheaves bow down. In the next dream, you have the sun and the moon. Every dream, which Joseph freely interprets to his brothers, is, you know what? Everybody should bow down to me. You know what? I am going to rule the world. Would you like somebody who is always telling you that? Absolutely not. And so here's the boys, dysfunctional family. What's about to happen? Joseph, once again, is sent to go check on everybody, all the boys, make sure they're working, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. And they see him, and they grab him, and they decide, we're going to kill him. And if we're going to kill him, his mama can't have babies. That's already been pretty much proven. And so we don't have to listen about the pretty wife and the ugly wife anymore. And we don't have to worry about him being our manager and being our boss and being in charge. If we kill him, he's out of the picture. We've got it made. All right? The oldest boy and Judah, both of them, say, wait a second. This is a big deal. And they think, okay, we're just going to throw him in a well and pretend he's dead, and then maybe we can come back later and rescue him. And when they come back, what they've decided is, hey, instead of killing him, let's sell him into slavery. And you kill slaves, especially if they're headed down towards Egypt. They died. And so that way he dies and we get money. Hey, this is even better. So they sell him into slavery and they get his coat of many colors. And they enjoyed this. They killed a goat probably. And then they covered that coat with blood, went back and said, oh, Dad, we're so sorry, but something must have eaten your son since you sent him out by himself. We're so sorry, but he's dead. So we don't have to listen to him anymore. Jacob has just been fooled by his kids. And what you see here is the kids have turned into their father. And it's pretty fun in Jacob's mind when he gets to fool everybody. The rest of Jacob's life, everybody's going to take advantage of. And that's a fulcrum right there in 34, 35. Before he takes advantage of everybody, now suddenly the world comes back and everybody begins taking advantage of him. So there you go with Jacob. Now the story will transition, And from here, that's 10 chapters of Genesis. And then from here to the end of the book, to us on the outside, if you're just reading the book and not thinking about genealogy, you're going to think the rest of the book is about Joseph. It's not about Joseph. But Joseph is the background character who lets you see God working with Judah. And so God wants to introduce us to Judah, but he can't do it without Joseph in the background. So right at that point after we sell him, we see years later, here's Judah, and Judah's got 3 grown boys. The oldest boy is okay? Judah is married to a Canaanite, which you're not supposed to do. He seems to be a worldly person. He's got 3 boys, and his oldest boy, marries Tamar, okay? You know her from Matthew chapter 1 and verse 3, right? Okay? We don't know much about her because we don't talk about it. All right, for whatever reason, dies. The rule is when you die, your brother takes in his sister-in-law, and he has a child with her, and that's the rule. That's what you're supposed to do. Now, in our day, we think that is gross. Yuck. What's going on here, they don't have Social Security like we do. They don't have, the social safety net like we do. What's going on here is this tradition is done so that when a lady, if she has a son, that son will grow up and take care of her. And so this widow will live with the brother until her son's old enough to provide for her. So it's a way of providing. Boy number 2 is now married to Tamar, and he is not a good guy. He's told you need to sleep with your wife, and he's okay with that. But then he's told, okay, you sleep with your wife, you're going to have a child, and that child you have to provide for, and that child's going to take part of the inheritance and take care of Tamar and that boy. And he's not okay with that. And so he sleeps with Tamar, but he doesn't finish the act because he wants the good part, but not the bad part. You see why we don't talk about this very much in church? Whew. Okay. All right. Yeah, I feel really weird right now. All right. So he is not fulfilling his responsibility. And so God strikes him dead. Judah looks and says, all right, here's Tamar. I lost 1 boy to her. I lost 2 boys to her. I am not losing 3. And he says, oh, my 3rd son is too young. You just sit in my house. You just kind of go into the background. We're going to pretend you're not even here, which is the exact opposite of what Judah should have done. And so years later, Judah is traveling through with work or whatever else. He comes by a pagan temple. Pagan temple has prostitutes. And as he's as he's going along, maybe he's driving his goats. That's what he said. As he's driving his goats along, all right, he goes along and he sees one of the temple prostitutes. And he's like, all right. So he sleeps with her. And of course, he doesn't have money. And he says, take my signet ring, take my staff, and I'll come back and pay you. And she says, okay. And so then he travels home. And when he goes back, nobody knows where that prostitute is. And so, hey, he doesn't have to pay. He can get another staff or whatever. And so he's at home. And about a few months later, somebody comes to him and says, whoa, Tamar is pregnant. And Judah is like, oh, no, she better not be doing that. She better not be sleeping around. That is my boy's, wives, That cannot happen. And so he brings her out to shame her and to put her to death. And so as she comes out, before they bring her to death, she pulls out his staff and his signet ring and his cloak and says, oh, by the way, you needed this for payment. Okay? Wow. Okay? Now, notice the phrase. Let me find out where I'm at, because this phrase is very important. 38:26. He says, she is more righteous than I am. My daughter-in-law is more righteous than I am. She recognizes God's provision, and she recognizes that every man in her family is not doing what he needs to do. And so she steps up, takes that leadership role, and she makes sure that she and her family are going to be taken care of. Judah says she is more righteous than I am. Now, That marks a transition in Judah's life. And so now we go back in the book of Genesis to Joseph, and we'll fly through Joseph because, man, that preacher would not get quiet this morning. I was so excited. It's like the first time in 3 weeks they told me don't be short with the sermon, and I went the opposite direction. You know what they're telling me next week? Got to be short. All right. Joseph goes through, hey, sold into slavery to Potiphar. He does great at Potiphar's, and then his wife abuses him. And so, he's thrown into jail. He does great in jail, and then the people that he helps forget about him. And finally, he interprets a dream for Pharaoh. He's number 2 in the nation, and by his dream and by God's power, he turns Egypt into a superpower, makes them super wealthy because they have saved up grain while everybody used it during a good time. Now it's a famine, and so now they've got all the money because everybody has to come to Egypt to buy grain, and of course it's at a heightened price. Now Jacob and his family are starving to death in Canaan. You would think, well, that's against God's providence. It's land of milk and honey. God's working here. And so Jacob sends his boys to go get grain so that they can survive. And they show up, and they don't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them. Of course, Egyptians would shave their entire bodies. You look very different than you did when you had a beard. Joseph recognizes them. They don't recognize Joseph. And so Joseph's kind of mean to him. And he's like, you're just coming here to steal from us. You've come in here. And he keeps saying, I want you to go back. Oh, no. All right, real quick. I want you to go back and bring, we'll skip. Let's skip about 6 chapters. All right, come back, bring everybody. And then he says, oh, there's Benjamin. I'm going to throw him into jail. And what does Judah say? Put me in his place. He sees that Judah has grown. He's more righteous than I am. And so because of that, Judah receives the top billing.